Hello, everybody, and welcome to an enigmatic second episode of Movies I Seen This Month. I almost forgot the name of my own show. Not a good start. Anyway, I have a couple surprises for everybody today, especially for those of you out in TV land. And the surprise there is open your eyes and ears and you'll see that you are not in TV land. You're in podcast land. That's right. I've taken this audio-only show format and moved it into a podcast. A clearly revolutionary idea that will forever change the medium of entertainment. And if you're still watching this on YouTube, then forget what I just said and continue to enjoy. The second surprise is for everybody, and it's that I've already sold out. On episode 2, I've already sold out. It's got to be a record of some kind. That's right, I've sold out to Marvel. And that's because episode 2 of MISTM is about Spiderman Far From Home. I guess Marvel got wind of my Midsummer episode, and they noticed that their ticket sales went up by 2s, and they saw my first episode had views in the 10s, and they were like, you know what? It drums up sales. Let's give this guy exclusive rights to talk about Far From Home. So here we are, talking about Far From Home, brought to you by Marvel. Pretty cool, huh? Okay, shenanigans aside, the episode really is about Spider-Man Far From Home, so let's just get right into it. Just a little preface on my prior experience with superhero movies, just so you better know where I'm coming from in this review. I will say superhero movies aren't my favorite, and I can probably count the amount of superhero movies I've seen on one hand. Guess I'll try to do that now. The superhero movies I've seen in no particular order, because they are coming up as I remember them, are Thor Ragnarok, Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, Guardians Galaxy 1, Jingle All the Way, and I guess I have seen both of the Ant-Man movies. So that does bring me well over 5. So I'm a bit of a liar, but my experience with superhero movies is not as great as most people, I would say. And also, of course, I've seen Homecoming and now Far From Home. So I'm not the biggest superhero movie buff, and there's a reason for that, but maybe I'll get into it later. Who knows? We'll see. Let's just talk about Spider-Man, huh? He's cool. Written and directed by the Dream Team of Chris McKenna and John Watts, respectively, Spider-Man Far From Home carries a feeling much akin to what came with Homecoming, and I really did enjoy that movie. So, pretty much from start to finish, I was mostly all smiles. The humor in the movie is very on point. It's not too over the top. There's not stupid jokes in serious scenarios, and there's not too many jokes in regular scenarios. The movie portrays younger people pretty well, I would say. It doesn't feel like 40-year-old man writing teenager lingo. It feels like teenagers being teenagers. Even if they are in a world where a cataclysmic event occurred and half the population of the entire universe was wiped out and brought back, they still act fairly normal, all things considered, which is a plus. And that being said, there are 2 characters off the top of my head I feel would be better off more or less combined. Not to get too into it, but I never really felt any genuine threat, for lack of a better term, from the Chris character, I believe that was his name, who got in between MJ and Peter. I know he's supposed to be there to provide a little bit of relationship drama between Peter and MJ, but not only do I feel that they could have done just fine without a character like that, just the 2 of them being awkward to each other and not really wanting to say that they like each other really would have been enough. Those scenes were probably my favorite of the non-superhero part. Just friends being awkward friends with each other in this movie. All that dialogue is super good. But it just felt sort of shoehorned. Like the Chris character was last minute added in there, like, oh, maybe the writers felt that MJ and Peter were just having too much of a cruise control situation in regards to their relationship. So like, okay, Let's just get this old kid come new kid, or old kid come old kid. What am I saying? New kid. He was old and then he became old. He whatever. He was an old character and then he aged, so he became actually older. Okay, I've confused myself. Point being, if they wanted to add some Peter insecurity drama, they could have just used Preppy Guy, who has previous beef with Peter Parker that they could build off of. Even if it's just Preppy Guy finding out that Peter likes MJ, so he just screws at Peter. So he like sits next to her on the bus or the plane or whatever, and they watch a movie together, and he turns around and looks back at Peter 3 rows behind him, and he's like, and he gives a thumbs up and a wink. Look at me and MJ, you know? I mean, that would have worked, and it would have been fine. It would have accomplished the same thing. Peter would have been like, I'm freaking out because I'm in like with this girl, and clearly she likes this other dude because he's thumbs upping. You know? Yeah, that would have been fine. Regardless, that's super minor. I didn't like the Chris character. He was stupid. Get rid of him. I never want to see him again in Spider-Man Homeward Bound. Enough talking about the kids. Let's talk about the heavy hitters, aka Tom Holland, the main kid, and Jake Gyllenhaal, the main bad boy. For my money, Tom Holland is the best Spider-Man. I didn't see the middle one, but the first guy, Robert Zemeckis, Tobey Maguire. Tobey Maguire was an okay Spider-Man, but Tom Holland is the Spider-Man, as far as I'm concerned, in movie form, that is. He's super good as awkward teenage boy who happens to have superpowers. It's always delightful when he's on screen. It makes me giggle when he says his funny words. I worry about him when he expresses feelings of inadequacy. And I root for him when he becomes brave, strong, inspired boy. I hope he plays Spider-Man for the next 40 years, and I haven't seen Tom Holland in any other movie, and I'm sort of afraid to, because I'm not sure if I will not be able to see insecure Spider-Boy behind the eyes of whoever he's playing. Wonderful Tom Holland aside, Jake Gyllenhaal is very good in this movie as Mysterio. When it comes to the boy Jake, I don't know if it's just me or if it's something my whole generation deals with, but whenever I see Gyllenhaal in a movie, I get a little reserved. I get a little antsy because I think back on his career. And the first movie I remember him in was Bubble Boy. And then you think Day After Tomorrow. And then you think Prince of Persia. And I know Jake Gyllenhaal has done wonderful movies in the past. I absolutely loved Nightcrawler. I even liked Zodiac. But just those previous goofy movies he's been in, they always crop up in my old skull. And I'm like, oh gosh, Bubble Boy is going to be a bad guy. What is happening? But then I remember Nightcrawler, and then I remember Velvet Buzzsaw, and then I remember Southpaw, and I'm like, you know what? Let's give him a shot. And he never fails to deliver. Far From Home included. He is very good as Mysterio in Far From Home. Okay, now that we've talked about characters, time to talk about the actual story and plot of the film. I'll get into some basics before spoilers, so you can release your hands from your mouses for the time being. Don't worry. Spoilers will, of course, be very clearly denoted. As for the overall story, it's still pretty run-of-the-mill Spider-Man fare overall, which, to me, is better than typical hero movie fare. Because with the Spider-Man movies, they do a good job at making serious threats not seem world-shattering in a way that would require a Thor or a Hulk. You're still very concerned about the threats being presented to you, but it's not like outer space man is coming down to rain death fire on the planet, and the entire planet will be dead in 1 hour if 6 superheroes don't combine their forces to punch everything in sight. Now, even though, for those people who really paid attention in the movie, what I just described may be eerily close to what actually happens in the movie, you should note that there is never a point in the movie where one superhero man turns to 3 other superhero men and says, we need backup. One superhero man turns to another superhero man and says, punch this fire hydrant and get the water jets pointed at the enemy. while I fly around and shoot green lasers at it. A much more self-contained, but still super, solution to the problem. There's no need for a Thor to be there to lightning shock everything until it disintegrates, or for a Hulk to be there to be impervious to everything until he's won. You have goofy-looking Mysterio and Spider-Man. And Spider-Man, who is a great blend of actually strong, but still pretty vulnerable on many levels, to provide a believable risk even with lower stakes villains. So I assume you've at least seen the trailer, so you know the threat. You've seen Mysterio teaming up with Spider-Man to fight Flame Elemental thing, and Wind Elemental thing, and Water Elemental thing. And it's super cool, super enjoyable. The effects in this movie, super great. And I don't really care about effects too much. I mean, most of the movies I watch are like 20 years old anyway, so I'm not super into effects. But when I see good effects, I appreciate them. And let me tell you, if you're an effects buff, or whatever you like to go by, I recommend this movie. Them's effects is really good. Before I get into spoilers, let me touch on a point that usually irks me in most movies, and especially in hero movies, and that is the sense of humor in these movies. Typically, the style of humor in superhero movies is taking a joke to the nth degree, to where, I guess, people who find repetition funny love the jokes, but for me, it's just irritating after the fifth level of the joke goes off, and I'm like, please let this scene end. There are people dying, both people in the movie and me in the theater. But as far as I can recall, there is not one instance of humor in this movie that is taken too far. The only one that gets close is the scene where Nick Fury is talking to Spider-Man in his room. And I don't want to ruin what happens, because it may have actually been my favorite humor point in the movie. It was like the only time I can think of maybe ever that I had to stifle my laughter because I didn't want to annoy people around me. I feel like they were one step away from taking it too far, but they ended it when they ended it, and they ended it with a super strong punch, and boy, was I giggling on the inside. And every time I think of humor in superhero movies, I either think of like recent Guardians movies or Thor movies where they're like, hey, this is a funny situation. Isn't the situation funny? It's funny because of the situation. And they just go a little too hard, and the point of the joke is they're making a big deal of it. I either think of that, or I think of the one clip in one of the Andrew Garfield Spider-Mans. They played it in the trailer where like he's being accosted by a thug, and he's like, oh no, little men with little guns, my only weakness. I think about that scene, and I'm like, come on, man, really? That's your joke? So every time I think of humor in these superhero movies, I think of those two stupid things, and I just dread whenever I can tell a joke is coming. But Far From Home, on point. On humor point. Okay, so from here on out, we are going to get into the juicy bits of the movie, aka the spoilers. So, if you wanna skip spoilers, hit 2750 right now. Okay, before I get too knee deep into spoilers, I will say the trailer for Far From Home is so good. It does such a super amazing job at hiding what actually happens in the movie. Like, there's not even a hint of what's going to happen. Of course, if you have previous comic book knowledge of Mysterio's character, you can surmise at least generally what's going to happen. But if you're coming into these movies blind, boy, are you going to be whamzow kapowed. But that being said, I did know the nature of Mysterio's character, so I knew going into this movie that he would eventually be the ultimate evil. But even that considered, there were like 5 things I was at least like guessing or speculating about this movie based off things Mysterio says in the trailer. And by the end of the movie, all chances of any of those guesses were like pushed into the dirt, an impossibility. So I will say, if you're listening to this and you marginally care about spoilers and you haven't seen the movie yet and you plan on seeing the movie, I would still skip this, even if you love hearing the sound of my voice and you love supporting what I do. I appreciate you, but I would recommend seeing the movie first. Okay, that aside. That's going to be my catchphrase, by the way. That aside. So, all that aside. We know Mysterio is going to be the ultimate bad guy, and he turns out to be the ultimate bad guy. But what I didn't expect was like the whole of the multiverse thing to also be a big lie. Like I heard them alluding to the multiverse in the trailer, and I was like, okay, cool. This is how they're going to introduce the bandage to the universe. This is how they can introduce the anything can happen element to the universe. But it turns out to be a big freaking lie, dude. Mysterio just lies about everything. And one particular theory I had, and this is just coming off of a personal interaction between a friend of mine who had seen the movie beforehand, and he told me, hey, when you see the movie, be sure to stick around for the post-credits scene. And he had said this in response to me saying, whoa, that multiverse stuff in the trailer, that means they can do anything they want to. And after hearing that, he looks me in the eyes and he says, stick around for the post-credit scene. In regards to that, you're going to see a cameo from somebody you may not expect. So immediately in my head, I'm like, dang, Andrew Garfield is going to be at the end of this movie. And we're going to have some Spider-Man on Spider-Man shenanigans. And lo and behold, I get to the post-credit scene. And spoilers within spoilers, it's freaking J. Jonah Jameson. J. John Jameson's there, and he's on the news. So, at this point, I'm getting sort of sidetracked here, but at this point, I'm super confused because at the beginning, they introduced the multiverse, and it turns out it's a lie. So in my head, I'm thinking, well, there goes Andrew Garfield, rest in peace, buddy. And then they get to the end, and it's the newspaper man from the first Spider-Man movies. So I'm like, is this real? Is the multiverse real? And then I'm like, no, they wouldn't double lie about that. This is just another silly cameo. But when you think about it, why would you make that specific of a cameo in a story where you've brought about and lied about a multiverse? It's so confusing. Or maybe I'm just dumb. It's confusing to a dummy like me. Alright, personal anecdotes and issues with the multiverse, lying, and cameos aside, let's get back to what happens with Mysterio and Spider-Man. So it turns out the elementals are all holograms being controlled by Mysterio and his band of people who have been burned by Stark. And their motivation seems found enough. I mean, they've made clear in the previous movies that Stark is pretty much a huge jerk, and the only people that quote-unquote like him enough are his fellow superheroes who have to fight alongside him. So he's burned like 20 people in his past that used to work for him, and they've all banded together to get posthumous revenge on Tony and more or less take over the world via superhero influence. So Mysterio is trying to use fake threats to prop himself up as the greatest superhero to gain overall just control of people via superhero influence. And he is able to at least get the beginnings of that happening. Of course, this is a superhero movie, so all the stakes are flimsy and hollow and fake, so you know it's not going to happen, but at least he gets a foothold. So Mysterio is essentially a crew. Jake Gyllenhaal is the main figurehead, but in order to work all the effects and make all the damage seem real, he needs a crew to back him up. And at some point, a drone carrying one of the hologram components is accidentally hit by Spider-Man, and a piece falls off, and it is brought to Spider-Man's attention, and this is how he begins to unravel the true intentions of Mysterio. And one of the biggest faults of superhero movies, to me, comes into effect at this point, and it is overly stupid characters. So one member of Mysterio's crew is the overall tech dude and droid wrangler, and he is able to see a piece of this droid is missing, a hologram projecting component is missing, and he doesn't say anything immediately to anybody in the crew. He just lets it go. And after Spider-Man finds it, Jake Gyllenhaal says, "Hey, this droid is missing its hologram component. What's going on?" And stupid tech droid wrangler's like, "Oh, it probably just fell off. It's no big deal." At this point, I am agreeing with Jake Gyllenhaal, who is pretty peeved at this guy. And he's like, "Are you kidding me? The whole point of this plan is to have a perfect illusion, and a piece of the illusion fell off, thus making it not perfect. Why would this ever be just something you shrug off, you stupid idiot?" And I'm like, "Yes, Jake Gyllenhaal, yell at this man and point your green aiming lasers at his forehead and scare him. Teach him a lesson to not be so stupidly dumb in the future." So in response to this, Jake Gyllenhaal naturally has the inclination that he has to go kill Spider-Man, which, I mean, is true. Spider-Man knows that this is all fake and his plan is going to be unraveled, so he decides to go kill Spider-Man. And how does somebody like Mysterio do this? Mysterio not being super strong or not having any superpowers, only commanding the power of illusions via drones, being tech savvy and manipulative. He does it by tricking Spider-Man into walking in front of a bus. And now I know that sounds funny, but the scene leading up to Spider-Man being hit by a bus is so good. It's so incredibly well done. I'm still considering going back, buying another ticket for $40 and seeing the movie again just to see that scene. It is mostly a special effects extravaganza with some wonderful manipulation from Mysterio thrown in there, but good golly, Miss Cinnamon Gravy, it's good. I don't even know how to properly describe it, but it's sort of like the effects that happened during, what's that other one? Doctor Strange, that they were pimping out a lot, but just so much better, so much more rapid fire and elaborate and intense. It doesn't really give you too much time to even parse what's going on. It's just rapid fire, one scene to another, transition after transition of just Mysterio just bombarding Spider-Man with these visualizations that are super disorienting while being super personal to Spider-Man and just battering him mentally. It's not even a physical confrontation. It is a mental fight against Spider-Man, and you can tell that Mysterio is just beating the hell out of Spider-Man in this arena. And after mentally beating the hell out of Spider-Man, he beats the hell out of him physically by getting him hit with a bus. It's great. It's the perfect scene. It's the most perfect superhero scene there has ever been written. So, after that point is the part in the typical character story arc where Spider-Man is at his lowest, he regains his composure, he comes back, he goes after Mysterio. There's a scene harkening back to the stupid idiot droid wrangler guy. There's another elemental hologram going on, this time super deluxe, and Spider-Man's on the inside of it. He snuck his way on the inside and he's hopping around on drones, and Jake Gyllenhaal's like, "Hey, the illusion's acting up, what's going on?" And stupid idiot droid wrangler guy's like, "Maybe the droids flew into some burns, I don't know." And Gyllenhaal, you can tell he's got a look in his eye. He thinks back and he's like, "This guy was an idiot before, he's probably going to be an idiot again." So he uses a camera to look on the inside, and sure enough, there's Spider-Man wrecking his stuff. So Spider-Man fights 1,000 drones, and he beats them up, and there's a final confrontation between him and Mysterio on an enclosed bridge. And harkening back to one of my least favorite superhero things, this is where the superhero displays immense superhuman stupidity. And when he's one-on-one against the bad guy who was all about illusions and manipulation and information control, and there's still tons of drones fighting around, Spider-Man takes off his mask for the final speech against Mysterio after he punches him in the head to death. Well, okay, some of the drones shot Mysterio, so it's not like Spider-Man is responsible for his death, but The point still stands that Spider-Man uses incredibly stupid terminology here. So there's droids flying around, just wrecking everything, and Spider-Man is ultimately able to say, "Hey, Mysterio did this," and he's in the middle of calling off the drones, and he says, "Execute them all," talking to AI. He's like, "Execute them all," and the AI's like, "You would like to end all drone strikes," and Spider-Man's freaking out. It's like, "Yes, execute them all," instead of saying like, please, please God, stop all these drones from killing everybody and wreaking havoc, just quit it, please. He says execute them all. So of course Mysterio is able to manipulate that footage, well, his team more or less, because he is supposedly dead. So his team of 20 people behind him manipulate the footage in a that is showcased in a post-credit scene that makes it seem like Spider-Man was behind all the drone attacks. They have a clip of him saying, "Use the drones to execute them all," or something more or less. And Mysterio has a recording of himself being like, "I was a hero when Spider-Man attacked me. He's going crazy. He's using drones to kill people." And then it cuts to Spider-Man, "Execute everybody, kill them all." He doesn't say kill them all, but it's the intent. And Mysterio says, also, Spider-Man is Peter Parker. And that's how the post-credit scene ends. So I suppose that the being revealed as Peter Parker thing, he couldn't have avoided that, but it just felt really silly that he decided to say execute them all in that intense scenario. I remember sitting in my chair, slunched over at a 90-degree angle in my chair, perpendicular to the seat, and hearing him say execute them all. And I remember in my mind thinking, are you really saying execute them all in front of this master of manipulations and illusions that you are well aware of his abilities, and you're going to say execute them all right in front of him with your Spider-Man mask off in front of him? Is this really what you're doing, Spider-Man? Earlier in the movie, weren't you freaking out about the multiverse and going into detail about how that would fundamentally ruin everything we know about like physics or whatever? And now at the end of the movie, you just demask yourself against this master of information and manipulation, and also shout, execute them all. You're not a very smart boy when it comes down to it, Peter Parker. Hate to break it to you. Okay. And that's the end of the spoiler discussion. Boy, what a cluster that was. At any rate, I think it's a very good movie. My complaints about it are general superhero movie complaints. Like everything I brought up that was a negative can be attributed to every single superhero movie, which is why I don't watch many of them, but I do enjoy the Spider-Man movies. They more than make up for what is lacking in superhero movies, I feel, with charm, well-written characters, and a good story that's not stupidly over the top. The threats in the Spider-Man movies, as I said before, do a great job at feeling threatening while not feeling over the top world decimating. The visuals in the movie are also a sight to behold. I'm hesitant to say it, but I would probably say that the visuals alone warrant a viewing of this movie. There's that certain scene I talked about in the spoilers that is so incredibly well done. I think everybody should see it if you are into superhero movies. And even if you're not into superhero movies and you want to waste $60 on a movie ticket on a random movie, I would recommend Far From Home just for that scene. Not even to mention that just the movie itself is good. Alright, turns out I don't know how to sign off on a superhero movie. It was just good. It was a good superhero movie. If you like superhero movies, watch the superhero movie. It's a good superhero movie. That being said, this is probably the last quote-unquote modern movie I'll be reviewing for a while, even though it's been out for a month. This was the last one on my radar as far as in-theater movies goes. So from here on out for a while, I'll probably be digging into my list of 80 movies that I've been planning on seeing for years. So I don't know what it will be. You don't know what it will be either. It will be a surprise. And as usual, this review is under 30 minutes long. Thank you for listening.